As we speak in Georgia, there are huge anti-government protests, huge pro-EU protests going on in Georgia. What is happening in Georgia? So, welcome to NWE War Reports, formerly New World Economics. We are going to explore the situation currently in the Republic of Georgia. So, there has been a new draft law that, unfortunately, the Georgian government, it seems like they're going to bow to Western demands here. After looking through this, I try to look at everything through an objective view. I am hardly seeing the objectivity in this. This is going to seem a little bit biased, but after reading through this Wikipedia article that I'm looking at, Georgia is crazy. The situation here is crazy. The politics are crazy. The politicians themselves are insane. Just the whole thing. All right. So for those of you guys that aren't aware of Georgia, we're not talking about the state. We're talking about the country of Georgia, specifically this country. It is in the Black Sea. Going to our Ukraine map, looking at this map, it's this territory essentially right here. These are the internationally recognized borders of Georgia. However, if you look at these, let's look at this map here, you'll see these two regions that are colored in. They're called Abkhazia and South Ossetia. They are breakaway, self-declared, self-independent regions of Georgia. From the moment that Georgia got its independence from the USSR, they have never had control over these regions. I think that's an important fact here because there's people that say, within the internationally recognized borders of Georgia, they rightly belong to Georgia. They're illegally occupied by Russia, but for a very long, there are Russian troops in these regions, but for a very, very long time, there were not Russian troops in these regions. The Russians then added in peacekeepers to these regions, and then, a bunch of stuff happened. Each side kind of shot at each other. It's tough to blame. It's tough to say who really started the whole thing, but ultimately the culmination of it ended up with an attempt by the Georgian military to invade South Ossetia and capture the capital of Shakman Valley. I don't know how to say that. Sorry. But that then caused a Russian invasion of Georgia and a short and humiliating 5-day war between Russia and Georgia. So we are going to get in, with that bit of background on Georgia. It's been a very contentious issue for a long time. Shortly before this invasion happened, Georgia was promised NATO membership or a path to NATO membership. At the same time, Ukraine was. It was widely seen on the international community that this was a huge red line for Russia and probably caused the Russian attack on Georgia. A lot would argue, including myself, that that statement alone, that offer, that olive branch that NATO extended to Georgia, probably was going to result in a war with Russia, regardless. Nevertheless, it is important to recognize the decision by the then Georgian president to launch the first strike, which was a very stupid one. I guess we'll say, and we'll get back to talk about this figure very soon. So fast forwarding to today, we have the war in Ukraine. There's many Georgian nationals that are fighting for Ukraine because they have the same hatred and animosity for Russia. Very understandable for countries that have fought wars against each other. And then we have protests that have broken out in the Georgian capital here in March. And this is this Wikipedia article I was talking about in one of my videos earlier today. Parts of this article literally made me laugh. It is a great read. I highly recommend you go to this article before it gets removed because I think, in my opinion, Wikipedia has a very pro-liberal Western bias. And the content of this article is very difficult for me to read this and not see the anti-protest perspective, I guess you can say. Like it seems to me, and what I get from this is like this protest is the people participating in either have no idea what's actually going on, or they're out protesting because they've been told to go out and protest, which it's absolutely fascinating. I know that's already starting off. It's a really biased view, but bear with me. It's like read into this. It is kind of crazy. So the 2023 Georgian protests are an ongoing series of street demonstrations taking place throughout Georgia from March 2023 onwards, over parliamentary backing of a proposed law on transparency of foreign influence. All right, so they don't like this law. Why don't they like this law? Which requires the NGOs to register as agents of foreign influence if the funds they receive from abroad amount to more than 20% of their total revenue. Very strange. Police have been reported as using water cannons and tear gas to disperse the protests, especially in the capital, Tbilisi. There's water cannons and stuff we saw here in this video. This was recorded 2 or 3 days ago in the capital. As you see here, this girl has an EU flag. Obviously, you can tell what the protesters want. They want to be in the EU. Whoever has the water cannon is trying to spray them with water. Now, getting into the background of this, this is a lot of stuff about trying to join the European Union, trying to join NATO, which I will say is a very, very difficult stretch, and you almost have to feel bad for the elected officials in countries like Georgia and Ukraine and Moldova, because you have populations which clearly will protest and demand this sort of thing without it ever really being possible. One of the reasons why it's not possible is Article 8 of NATO, which reads, each party declares that none of the international engagements now enforced between it and any other party, in any other of the parties or any third state, is in conflict with the provisions of this treaty, and undertakes not to enter into any international engagement in conflict with this treaty. So essentially what that's saying is if you have open conflict, whether it's if you're currently at war with another country, or if you have a breakaway separatist regions, if you're actively in a civil war, you cannot join NATO. And it's possible. Well, that's not a fair argument. They're suggesting that NATO will not allow it, right? Like it's not explicitly against the rules, like because of like the activity around these conflicts. Like say Moldova has Transnistria. They're not actively in a war, but Transnistria is a breakaway region, part of Moldova. The internationally recognized borders of Moldova has split away and have created their own country. Moldova can't do anything about it. Moldova can't join the EU because its borders aren't secured. It has active international engagements between it and a third party state, that when, say, if Moldova were to enter the EU, that problem now becomes the EU's problem. The EU is not, or NATO is not going to sign treaties that bring them a problem. They're not going to sign up for problems, right? Same thing with Georgia, Abkhazia, South Ossetia. They're not going to sign up for membership. They're not going to let a country join that has active border disputes signing up for a problem. Ukraine had the war in the Donbass. No matter what they say about EU, about NATO, Ukraine was never going to be allowed to join while they had an active war. They would have had to have finished the war, cleaned up their borders, left the conflict before they were allowed to join NATO. So that's very important here to recognize that what these protesters are asking for is not exactly possible, not from the Georgian end, but from the European end. So in a way, it really is a false promise. So this, started in June. European Parliament issued a resolution basically condemning Georgia of eroding press freedoms. Another resolution was issued in June 29th regarding the imprisonment of Mikhail Saakashvili, who was the former president of Georgia, and saying that he had to be treated immediately in a special institution abroad. What's that mean? What institution? Why does he need to be treated? So let's look into Mikhail Saakashvili, former president of Georgia, Mikhail Saakashvili, who left Georgia in 2013 and was condemned by the Tbilisi city court to 6 years in prison in absentia for abuse of power, embezzlement, and his implication in the attempted murder of an opposition MP. What? This guy. Wow. I mean, that's pretty crazy. And then looking into Mikhail Saakashvili himself is a Georgian politician and Ukrainian politician and jurist. He was the third president of Georgia for 2 consecutive terms from January 25th, 2004 to 2013. And then from May 2015 to 2016, he was the governor of Odessa in Ukraine. How in the hell is that possible? How can you be the president of one country and then the governor of another? This has to be one of the only instances of this in the modern world. Like I challenge you guys, please, someone in the comments, let me know of any similar conflict of interest like this that you've seen. I mean, in America, you can barely run for Senate or Congress if you have ties or dual citizenship with another country. You know, like some of you will remember Dr. Oz ran for Senate in Pennsylvania, has dual Turkish citizenship, and they attacked him on it constantly. You know, it wasn't illegal for him to do it, but you know, it's very difficult for someone with potentially mixed loyalties to hold offices in different countries. It's of their citizenship. It's crazy. But yeah, so this guy tried to return to Georgia on the eve of the election in 2001, and he was arrested. Hilariously, Saakashvili entered the country secretly, hiding in a semi-truck trailer loaded with milk products. He illegally crossed the state border of Georgia, bypassing customs control. Now, this part's important because this is why the EU is condemning Georgia and demanding they release him from prison and that he needs medical treatment. So he was placed in the Rustavi prison and announced a hunger strike. He announced a hunger strike. So we can all agree that a hunger strike, sometimes a valiant and noble undertaking, is still self-inflicted. His personal doctor asked authorities to move him to the hospital as he continued with his hunger strikes since his arrest, and his health condition has allegedly worsened. On 14th December 2022, the European Parliament has again called the European Council to sanction Ivanishvili, who's a different guy. All the names are similar, accusing him of deteriorating the democratic political process in Georgia, while calling on the Georgian government to release Saakashvili on medical grounds and treated abroad. Why does it seem like the European Union is trying to get their guy back? Like that to me, like, why can't he be treated in Georgia for his medical problems? Why does he have to be treated abroad? See, that's specific request. They're not mentioning when the EU makes a statement. They're not saying, hey, this guy has self-inflicted illness on himself by going on hunger strike. That means he deserves to be released from prison and overturned to us, to our care. That's what's being said here. And then on 14th February, they adopted another resolution, again going after this Ivanishvili for mistreating Mikhail Saakashvili. Apparently, he's also not only a politician, Ivanishvili, but he's the prison guard or the cook, the jail cook. Once again called for his release from prison and personal sanctions on Ivanishvili. So the Georgian Dream Party, who is the ruling party of Georgia, the so-called pro-Russian party that the media is talking about right now, responded. The prime minister, Irakli Garibashvili, this guy, called on the European resolutions irresponsible and offensive to our people. And then a parliamentarian, Dmitry, we're just going to call him Dmitry, questioned Georgia's policy of EU membership by saying, "We won't give up our dignity to get candidate status. No one will intimidate Bedzina Ivanishvili or the Georgian state with threats of sanctions." A rare case of someone standing up to threats of sanctions. So, there's this next part. It's a lot about how all this is a good. I recommend going to this page and reading the entire thing for what it is. But for the sake of time, I'm going to skip over this. It's a lot about the political situation between the ruling party, which is Georgian Dream, the primary opposition party, and the party founded by Mikhail Saakashvili, the United National Movement, which is, in terms of foreign policy, very hard European integration. That's their foreign policy. That is also, interestingly enough, the foreign policy of Georgian Dream. Both are pro-EU, pro-NATO. It's just that one is more willing to do exactly what they're told by NATO and the EU than the other, essentially. So, and I'll show you guys that page here towards the end. But, there's a bit in here where the Georgian Dream Party has kind of split. A new split off of that party has formed, and they are accusing the United National Movement of essentially being foreign agents of the U.S., and the U.S. trying to orchestrate a coup in Georgia, while the Georgian Dream Party itself denies all that and says still that where are we at here? Saying the United States and the European Union are Georgia's strategic partners. So regardless of some of the things that have been said, they're staying true and faithful to the EU and the US, even though arguably the EU and US are not staying faithful to them. So getting into the bill itself to talk about what the bill is and what the problem with this bill is, or what the problems the people have with it. Under the bill, non-commercial legal entities, which are the most common form of NGOs in Georgia, we're talking about broadcasters, media print outlets, different political outlets that print information and spread information throughout Georgia. They have to, outlets that use internet domains, etc. They have to register as agents of foreign influence if they receive more than 20% of their annual income from a foreign power and are subjected to monitoring by the Ministry of Justice. That seems totally like, what is wrong with that? Like you do not want foreign governments buying up big portions of your media and spreading propaganda to your population. That is a concern not only that Georgia has in trying to pass this law, but it's actually a law on the books in America. It's called the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA, a United States law that imposes public disclosure obligations on persons representing foreign interests. And we all know the case of RT, Russia Today, the news outlet that was banned from the US and from Europe because of its ties to the Russian government on the onset of this war. The United States government, the US people did not want Russian propaganda, as they said it, spread directly into the American media. So we have proven that in the EU and the US, we have the right to ban foreign influence on our media in any way that we seem necessary. This is not saying that like only specific people, we're not saying only Democrats are allowed to donate or allowed to fund CBS. Only Republicans are allowed to fund the news here or there. We're not saying any of that. We're talking about foreign powers funding information, essentially propaganda outlets in another country, right? So obviously, doesn't seem that crazy at all that country would have a problem with it, right? The U.S. absolutely freaked out over the possibility that Russia was using social media accounts to interfere in U.S. elections, much less directly funding news outlets in America. Could you imagine if it was discovered that Russia gave $1 billion to Fox News? People would be in the streets, right? So like this is what Georgia is trying to prevent. And guess who is complaining about it? The EU and the US are complaining about this, which essentially is an admission that our money is deep within the pockets of NGOs in Georgia. I don't know how else you can't take it like that. So, spokesman for the United States Department of State Ned Price criticized the bill and likened it to Hungarian and Russian foreign agent laws, suggesting that Hungarian and Russian foreign agent laws are bad, ignoring the fact that we have a Foreign Agent Registration Act, and also ignoring the fact that Hungary is in the EU legally and legally has this law on the books. So, it gets into basically how there's an argument going back and forth between the EU and Georgian parliamentarians, where the Georgian parliamentarians are saying that no, this law is legal. It doesn't break any of the rules in NATO, and the EU, in kind of a low key way, is basically saying, we disagree, or essentially, it doesn't matter whether you think it breaks the laws or not. If you go through with this, we're not going to allow you to join the EU. So, and I know I keep comparing EU and NATO, but obviously they're both sided. It's the EU that they want to join. It's NATO that they want to join. Specifically, this is EU laws that the European Union is arguing that this will affect. Obviously, Hungary's case in point that it doesn't. But they're threatening that this will basically, force NATO and the EU to ghost Georgia. So, this is one of the most interesting things that's happened. President of Georgia, Salome Zurabachvili, who interestingly enough was born in France as to a family that was Georgian political refugees from the 1920s, had never been to Georgia in her life before. And by Georgia, the region of Georgia, not the country of Georgia, because the country of Georgia wasn't a country again until 1991, after which she'd already had a pretty prominent career as a NATO and EU official in different positions. She is now the president of Georgia, and this is actually fascinating in terms of her family and private life. Beside and the languages she speaks, beside French and limited Georgian, she fluently speaks English and Italian. So she speaks fluently French, English, and Italian, and barely speaks Georgian, the language of the country she is now the president of, that she was not born in and has not lived in for the vast majority of her life. But anyways, that's all we'll say about her. She threw her support behind the protesters, as did the European Union, as did the United States, saying the path of European integration must be protected. That's a very engineered statement. They're not saying at all that this law is against, EU laws. They're saying that if we go through this law, that European integration will not happen because this law will piss off people in the EU and the US, and they will not allow it. Is essentially what she's saying. Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Garibashvili on March 7th reaffirmed his support for the law, saying the proposed provisions on foreign agents met European and global standards. Again, still arguing that this law does not contradict anything. And Georgia's Interior Ministry asked protesters to disperse, warning that legal measures would be taken to restore calm, blah, blah, blah. This is the part that I find the funniest. More than 60 civil society organizations and media outlets have said they will not comply with the bill if it is signed into law. There you go, Georgia. You have a list of 60 organizations, whether you get the law passed or not, that have essentially admitted that they are foreign agents under this new law, publicly, essentially admitted. So I would say, regardless of the outcome here, they've achieved something there. And now anyone that looks into this list of 60 organizations, they're going to know exactly who is receiving money from the West and who is not. And unfortunately for Georgia, it says today on March 9th, the ruling coalition announced their withdrawal from the bill after 2 nights of violent protests. So, very, very fascinating developments, very, very fascinating conflicts of interests. I always thought Georgia was much more clear cut in terms of like where its allegiances lie. Obviously, it had an unfortunate short little war with Russia. It has 2 breakaway regions that it can't get back. It's going to have a lot of trouble getting into the EU and NATO. 2 things that the majority of the Georgian population want as it is. Not only that, you also have the U.S. and the EU meddling within Georgia, supporting protesters against a pro-Western government. So this isn't a pro-Russian government here. This is a pro-Western government that could be more pro-Western in the eyes of the Western states if it were, overthrown, I guess you could say. So real quick, just to prove to you guys, looking at the ideology of this is the Wikipedia page for Georgian Dream, or no, this is the United National Movement of Georgia. This is the main opposition party, the party that was ruling during the war. It says foreign policy. The UNM's foreign policy program has a strong emphasis on Euro-Atlantic integration. During the first years of government, the party has tried to reconcile with Russia on topics like Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Trying to hold negotiations on that. Although its stance changed drastically since the 2008 war, when Russia was identified as the number 1 threat of Georgian national security, the party deems Russian actions against Georgia as imperialistic attempts to preserve its sphere of influence in the South Caucasus, blocking Georgian integration into the EU. So they're a straight up admission that Russia's presence blocks their admission into EU and NATO. And then looking at the foreign policy for Georgian Dream, which is the ruling coalition, in the field of foreign policy and security, the Georgian Dream supports European integration, while also taking a pragmatic approach to Russia. Pragmatic mean, for those of you guys who don't know the definition of that, dealing with things sensibly and realistically in a way that is based on practical rather than theoretical considerations. An approach or a word that most governments should approach almost everything with in a pragmatic manner. In December 2020, the Parliament of Georgia, attended only by representatives of Georgian Dream, adopted a resolution declaring integration into the EU and NATO as Georgia's priorities without alternatives. So very clearly, both parties want to be in NATO. They want to be in the EU, although they can't. And, you cannot say that one party is pro-Russian. They're both obviously very anti-Russian. They fought a war against Russia very recently. But regardless of that fact, if you do not do what this article tells me, or what this situation tells me, that if you do not pass the laws that the EU wants you to pass, even though they have member states with the same laws on the books, even though the US, another state that's supporting the protests, has similar laws on the books, if they don't want you to pass these laws, then you should watch out. You should definitely watch out. All right, guys, that's it for me today. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and have a good rest of your day.